with the birth date of Mithras and other gods who had been born around that same time, who had very similar stories to Jesus. This is all very interesting, right? Um, Now, Mithras also made his way into India. He became Mitra, the god, the Hindu god there. And we also have other deities like Balder. Balder is connected to this time of year through his symbolism with the mistletoe. He also is a resurrected god. And we also have the story of the Oak King and the Holly King. So in this story, these are two dueling figures. The Oak King represents the waxing half of the year, while the Holly King represents the waning half. And so what happens as at both solstices, so we have this solstice here, winter solstice, we have the other one on the opposite side of the year, which is the summer solstice. So at these 2 points in the wheel, these two deities or figures, whatever you want to call them, they will actually battle. Now at Yule, they will battle, and the Oak King becomes triumphant. He is, remember, the god of the waxing half of the year. Now they'll battle once again at Litha, in which case the Oak King will be defeated, the Holly King wins, and then that heralds in the waning half of the year. This is a battle, basically a battle of dominance, and the dominance here that they're battling for is what kind of energy will permeate the world. Now, I think what's very interesting is that at this time, it is the Holly King that is killed, goes into the underworld. And there are some people who say that Santa, one of his origin stories, is from that Holly King. So it's a bit humorous that this is the figure that is actually slayed right at Yule. So just a little bit of humor there. But it does bring up an interesting point about the Sabbats in general. Each Sabbat has an opposite. So, for example, we have Beltane and we have Samhain. They're at opposite ends of the wheel of the year. And what's interesting is though there are a lot of differences, obviously, between Beltane and Samhain, there are also similarities. So, for example, at both of those festivals, both of those times, the veils are very thin. At Beltane, the veil's thin in order to let more life in because there's a lot going on in the spring, lots of flowers blooming, animals being born. And at not Winter Solstice, at Samhain, we also have that thinning of the veils in order to let more souls out of this plane. So we can always see a seed of that solstice that we're presently in the opposite solstice on the other side of the wheel. So when it comes to Yule and Litha, we actually have 2 points on the wheel that are very much extremes and very much opposites of one another. So Litha, we have the sun at the peak of its power, summer solstice, and even though in most places we consider that the first day of summer, to the ancient Celts that would have actually been the middle of the summer. And same goes for Yule or winter solstice. To the ancient Celts, this was actually called midwinter, though for us in this modern time, we would say this is the first day of winter. But the point being is that at summer solstice, we have the sun, that solar energy at its peak. And at the winter solstice, we have that solar energy at its lowest point. But from this day on, even though that energy is at its lowest point, from this moment forward, all the way until summer solstice again, we'll have that waxing energy building and building and building. Even though we won't recognize it at first. What this reminds us, though, is that even at our lowest points, we still have that ability to gain power, right? So we still have that power within us. So even at winter solstice, when the energy is at its weakest point, that solar energy will grow again, and we can be reminded that that can happen to us as well. Now, another interesting point to bring up is that we don't really see solar energy when it changes at first. So what I mean by this is that we sit here on this darkest night, right? This longest and darkest night. And we actually look into the future and we recognize that there are going to be many more dark nights before the spring comes, even though we're in that waxing half of the year. So because solar energy moves so slowly, we don't see it for a while. Now, this next 6 weeks, like I said, is probably going to be very brutally cold and dark in many places. Thankfully, not here in Los Angeles, though it will get cold here. But our energy is in that state of waxing, nevertheless. And although winter has just begun, what Yule offers us is that promise of the coming life that blesses the world with hope. So that's really what we're doing here when we celebrate. And this is what that sun god personified is all about. The days grow longer, and even if we don't notice it yet, we still know that the sun is gaining strength. So let's talk a moment about some symbols of Yule. This is always an interesting conversation. The symbols of Yule, many of which are connected to symbols of Christmas. Now, the reality of this is that the pagan symbols precede the Christian symbols. And so while many Christians may not realize this, a lot of their traditions, especially those at Christmas, are borrowed or adapted from the pagans. So first, starting with the Christmas tree, there are a lot of origins of this. The story that I heard a long time ago, which may not have full truth in it, is that Martin Luther, so he is the father of the Protestant religion, the Protestant part of Christianity. He was out walking one day at winter solstice, and he happened to see the pagans decorating their trees with candles and lights, thought that it was a really neat idea. In fact, he thought that it represented God's goodness. And so he began to bring this tradition into the Protestant side of Christianity, and eventually it caught on, and more people did it until we get to this modern time when many people, most people, probably connect it to Christianity as opposed to paganism. Now, whether the story is true or not of it being Martin Luther, what we do know is that there are historical records that show in the 15th and the 16th centuries in Germany, people began bringing, and people, in fact, Christians, began bringing these trees into their houses. But the reality is that this is a much older tradition. The pagans were doing centuries and centuries and centuries before. Now, the evergreen is a symbol of the goddess, and the reason for that is because, as opposed to other trees which lose their leaves or die or appear to die during that harsh winter, the evergreen never does. It's called an evergreen because it always stays green. And so the ancient pagans connected this to that eternal goddess who just simply never dies, that earth, which may look like it becomes barren, but still holds the seeds underneath the surface. So the pagans, they brought trees into their houses in order to give the nature spirits, which they believed were living in them, a safe place to dwell during the winter. Now, the wreath is also connected to paganism, even though many people will connect that probably to Christmas and Christianity. The wreath itself is actually a symbol of the wheel of the year. So if you think about patriarchal time, it's very much linear, right? We move from one spot to the next spot to the next spot. But from a more pagan, more goddess oriented perspective, time is actually a circle. And this is where the wheel of the year comes from. So that wreath is symbolic of that wheel. Now, mistletoe also has a connection to paganism. In fact, this one goes back very, very far, and there's different connections here. So, to the ancient Celts, they looked at mistletoe as being a symbol of fertility. So, again, that idea that something is persisting when everything around it is cold, when everything around it is dying. The mistletoe was blooming in the middle of the winter. So immediately connected to the goddess, to fertility. Now in the Norse stories, the story of Frigg or Frigga and her son Balder also connect to the mistletoe. Balder was killed by an arrow that was made of mistletoe. Frigga, in her grief, she vowed that from that point forward, whenever anyone would walk underneath the mistletoe, they would be blessed, they would be kissed by this, as long as The mistletoe was never used again in order to kill someone or as a weapon. And so obviously, we see this at Christmas, people hanging the mistletoe, and I would assume that many of them actually don't know where the origin comes from and its ancient pagan beginnings. So another symbol is the Yule log. So even right there, we have the word Yule in it. Now this stems from the Scandinavian and Germanic paganism, and originally the interesting thing is we talked earlier about the pagans bringing the trees into the house in order to have a dwelling place that was safe and warm for the nature spirits so they could wait out the winter until it was time to go back outside. Um, so this tree would be brought in, but if, as you know, these trees might be very, very large and the homes might be quite small. So the tree was brought in its entirety. And so that very end that was the biggest part of it was usually burned while that whole rest of the tree just kind of stuck out into the center of the house. Now, this idea of burning the Yule log was later adopted by Christianity. And some say that the Yule log and lighting it, and you've probably seen pictures of candles in it, still very pagan, but became this Christian tradition where these candles would symbolize either Jesus's triumph over sin or perhaps Jesus's birth or something related to Jesus, when in actuality, this is a symbol that goes back much, much further than that. So let's talk about some ideas that we could do for Yule. And I also want to pause for a moment and just remind you too. So even though we are celebrating Yule winter solstice today, oftentimes I'll see posts or I'll get questions from people who are kind of panicked because they missed the Sabbath. And I just want to remind you that Sabbath energy is not really energy. That solar energy moves very quickly. So just like, or sorry, very slowly. So just like we were talking about earlier, where we don't really see the change in solar energy until we're rather far into it, the same thing goes here. So even though this is the moment, this day today, this is the longest night and the shortest day, we're just now entering Yule season. So what that means is you don't necessarily have to do a rite or a ritual tonight in order to tap into this energy. You have several more weeks as we settle into this energy, and we're going to be feeling Yule energy until probably about mid-January, where it starts to transition and start to feel a little bit more like Imbolc. So I just say that because if you don't have time to do something tonight, or you're watching this a day or two from now, just know there's plenty of time left in order to celebrate Yule or the winter solstice. So here's some possible thoughts that you could do. So I really love this first one. Now this first one, you could do it at any time, around Yule or winter solstice, but really this is a good one for the actual day, is to have a sunrise ritual that welcomes back the sun. And in fact, you can actually add into this a tending of your fire until dawn. I really love this idea. So my coven did this years and years and years ago, and we never really have done it since. But we invited people, and some kind of came that night and then went home. Others came the next morning, and there were some people who stayed all night long, and we stayed up all night, and someone tended the fire in the cauldron. And it's a way of almost like being a midwife to the goddess. Because remember in that story of the wheel, the goddess is giving birth to the sun, S-U-N, sun, S-O-N, on this night. And so she, just like a human woman, goes through labor, has her labor pains. And so it's almost like when we tend that fire and we stay up all night with her, it's like we're midwifing her. We're being her midwife. We're being with her. We're aiding her as she gives birth to the sun. So I really love that idea. But you don't necessarily have to do it only on the winter solstice. You could just pick a night around winter solstice and do it if that idea appeals to you. So another thing that you can do is decorate a Yule log, and there's a couple of different ways. So sometimes what people will do is they will take a log, and usually you're going to have to drill into it. You definitely could just decorate it, but if you want to stick things into it, you're probably going to have to drill into it. And so in one way, you can drill into the top and you can put some candles in there and light those and just have this really nice centerpiece. And then something my coven has done in the past is we drilled a bunch of holes all over the log, just very small ones. They don't have to be that deep. And then we gave everyone pieces of paper, so little strips of paper, and they could write their wishes on them, or alternatively, they could write on them something that they wanted to release. So I'm going to talk about this more at the end, but this is a very interesting time too because there's a release and a rebirth in it. So it's almost like a new moon, a dark moon, new moon kind of thing happening in the solar cycle. And so it's up to you if you want to look at this energy as I'm going to let go of something here, or I'm going to draw something in, because this is a time when you can do either. And so what you can do is you're going to have people write either thing on those strips of paper, then they stick it in those little holes on the log, and then you put that log in the hearth fire or the cauldron or the fire pit or wherever you want to burn it. And then as those wishes are burned, they're sent out into the universe. So I really love that idea a lot. Another thing that you can do is wassailing, or to have a bloat. So using that word bloat, this is usually thought of as a Norse tradition. My own coven has done this a lot. And in fact, in our most recent ritual that we just did a few days ago, we had a bloat. And so what we do here is usually we toast to various things that have happened during the year. It's very revelrous, especially if you bring alcohol. So you can use alcohol or you could use non-alcoholic beverages. And what you do is you will toast to the sky. So you could toast to the sky god, or just the sky in general, or the energies of the universe. And then you toast to the below, so to the goddess, to the earth, to the energies here, underneath the surface. And then we toast to something in the middle. And what we really like to do here is have some kind of a humble brag, where something good that you have done this year that you're really proud of, you get to speak that out, and then the entire group hail. They'll drink from their glasses and then they say hail. And it's a great way to just celebrate all of the accomplishments of the year and really build some community with the group. So we've actually done this with really big groups before, and it is a lot of fun. But you can also just do it yourself and just toast your own accomplishments while you drink your beverage. So it's a lot of fun. I definitely recommend trying it. So another thing that you can do is a ritual play or a ritual reenactment. So if you're really creative, especially in that kind of art, acting venue, you could try this. So as I mentioned earlier, we have this story of the Oak King and the Holly King battling. And in some versions of the story, they're actually battling for the love of the goddess. So we actually did this years ago. We've actually done this a couple of times. So there's one we did years and years ago where we had two people who were the Oak King and the Holly King. And I myself actually was the goddess. The goddess doesn't do very much in the play. She just kind of stands there and she watches. And then at the end of it, she has to award the Oak King as the victor. So she kind of crowns him, puts a crown on his head. But you can do any kind of version of this. We did it another year, and you do have to be careful because the second year we did it, when the people were rehearsing, I think the Oak King injured the Holly King, like in the actors. One actor injured the other actor before the play even began. So you just have to be a little careful because it is kind of a mock battle, but it is a lot of fun. And even if you don't want to enact that, or you're just not really, you feel it's way too much, it is a big production. You can always just read the story of that Oak King and Holly King. Another thing you can do is a candlelight vigil with pagan carols. I grew up as a Christian, and we always went to Christmas Eve service. And I remember, even being a pagan now, I remember one of my favorite parts was at the very end of the Christmas Eve service when they would dim all the lights. Everybody got their candles and they lit them, and then eventually the entire church was filled with this light. And I love this. It's not necessarily a Christian tradition anyway, because remember, lighting the candles, this was a pagan thing to begin with. So you can definitely bring this in. We've done this in rituals with our coven as well, where we dim everything, we give people these candles, and then we sing pagan versions of the carols as we welcome in that light as we light all those candles. It's just a very, very beautiful way. Um, you can also decorate Yule tree with some ribbons, and you can tie your ribbons on different colors onto the tree, and each one can symbolize a wish for the new year. That's a really pretty little ritual as well. You can get one of those little trees, or you can get a big tree. It's whatever. We've often gotten the little ones and just put them on the altar. And speaking of altar, so here are some ideas for the altar. So you want to decorate a Yule altar. You can have candles, mistletoe, any of these symbols we've been talking about, pine cones, oak and holly leaves, if you can find some, your Yule log, a small Yule tree, like I mentioned. And as far as colors go, you can put an altar cloth down that is green, red, white, or gold. So you can even see these colors of Christmas are the same colors generally of Yule. And a lot of this has to do with, that green, that evergreen color being the symbolic of that goddess who never dies. That red color of the fertility. So just think about the mistletoe and the berries that are that deep, deep red. And why did the Celts look up and think that that was a symbol of fertility? Well, for number one, they were one of the only things that was alive, that appeared to be alive in the middle of the winter. And number two, though, that red color is so symbolic of fertility. And then we have the white and the gold colors, bringing in the light. So you can see where these symbol colors come from. Now, if you work with deities in your practice, you can work with them as archetypes or as they're of the actual forms of the deities. So as deity archetypes, you can call in any solar sun god, sun child. You can call in the great mother, any great mother, or just call in the archetype of the great mother. And also the underworld and the horned gods. So these are sometimes strange gods to think about for Yule or for winter solstice. But if you remember, there is this rebirth happening. So we have a god coming out of the underworld, and we have another one going back in. They're switching places, the waning and the waxing halves of the year. So you can honor these underworld gods as well. As far as actual deities, this is just a short list. There's many, many more you could have on it, but you could honor Balder, Apollo, Set, Bel. Bel's kind of a strange one to think about because he is named after the holiday. Beltane is named after him, but he is a solar god. So any solar gods work here. Odin is a great one because all that Norse connection to the holiday. Mithras or Mithras, the Hindu version. Anahita, who is in many stories Mithras' mother, and she's kind of a virginal goddess like the Virgin Mary. So we have lots of great ideas here for gods or goddesses to worship and to honor here. Now, I do want to mention that this particular Yule is may feel darker than usual. Now, this is because of the placement. So I just want to spend a few moments really talking about what that means. So this Yule, winter solstice, is today on the 21st. As I mentioned, there's energy that will extend now for about the next 4 to 5 or so weeks. But we also have the dark moon, which is the day right before the new moon, happening tomorrow, and then the new moon happening on Friday the 23rd. So what this means is when we have this dark moon and this new moon right next to each other, that means that every month during that lunar cycle, we have this moment where there's a release on the dark moon and then there's a rebirth on the new moon, right? So we have kind of the two sides of that coin. But the interesting thing is that Yule has all that energy tied into it. Winter solstice, whatever you're calling it, has all that energy tied into it. It also is that moment of release and rebirth. So when these two cycles sync up, it actually compounds the energy. So in a lot of ways, Yule is literally like the new moon, dark moon of the solar cycle. And here we have these energies compounding one on top of the other. So that's why I mentioned it could feel much darker than usual. What that also means, though, is that the energy right now is just so, so potent for that release and rebirth. So what that means is that if you have something big you want to let go of, now's the time to do it. If you've got some shadow work that you want to engage in, now's the time to do it. You have the opportunity right now to really clear out something that you don't want to take with you into the next cycle, lunar, which would mean Friday, starting over, or the next solar cycle, the whole next year. This is just a great time to let go. All right, so sometimes people think Yule, winter solstice, it's all about bringing in the light, and they forget that there is that darkness right before that happens. So we want to let go, and then we want to bring in. All right, so I am going to answer a few questions that I have here. So I was actually sent 2 different questions, and if any came in after that, I apologize because I didn't see them. I only saw 2. But anybody who is here live, feel free to drop stuff in the comments. And if you are watching this later in replay and you have a question, put it in the comments as well. I make sure I go through and I look at all those, and I will answer it next week, okay? So the first question I have is from Tammy, and she says, will my partner and I find a way to communicate? So I just want to say is that though this is not really the type of question that I'm able to answer without talking to you at all, without knowing any details about it. So I'm not a psychic who can just give you answers without being able to speak to you. So I'm going to give you my best advice about the situation, and hopefully something here will resonate, okay? So my best advice is whenever someone asks me about communication of any kind, I'm always going to tell them to go to the throat chakra. So the throat chakra is our center, our energetic center of communication. It is also a center of creation and creativity. There's a lot that's going on in this center, right? But first and foremost, it's a center of communication. So what happens is that when our throat chakras have energy that is not moving through it optimally, we can have breakdowns in communication. And then what complicates it all is that we have more than one person involved as well. So communication is usually not just one-sided, just with us. We might have one or more people as well. So in an episode of Ask Aislin a few weeks ago, episode 24, I did an entire episode on the throat chakra. So if you're interested in knowing more about what I'm about to say, I highly recommend, Tammy, that you go and you watch that episode. You're here in the group, so it's going to be pinned up at the top of the group. But anybody can also go to my YouTube, Body, Mind, Witchcraft. Just type that in, and you'll see all the episodes there. It's episode 24 on the throat chakra. Okay, but I'm going to break down a few things in summary that I said there. So things that you can do to help to optimize the energy of the throat chakra, which will then in turn help with your communication, is neck stretches. So it seems strange, very mundane, but we get a lot of tension in the neck, and it can be as simple as just bringing the right ear down to the right shoulder and then taking that to the other side, doing some neck rolls, but really feel what's going on in your neck. If you're feeling a lot of tension in the neck, in the muscles, it's definitely an indication that we have some kind of energetic blockage in this area. Other things that you can do is making sound. So even speaking while touching the throat and just feeling the vibration of your words underneath your hands can help you balance that energy as well. You can hum, you can sing, anything you want to, but if you really want to dial into the energy of the throat, I would recommend using the seed sound that's associated with the throat. So each energy center has a seed sound, and what this is, it is a syllable that not only has meaning, but also activates energy in the body. So this seed sound for the throat is spelled H-A-M, but it's pronounced hum. Okay, and so you just chant this sound, hum, hum, and you could do this for 30 seconds, a minute. If you get going and you like it, do it for a couple of minutes, and you can even place your hands over your throat while you do it, and it's a great way to really open up that center. especially if there's something that you want to talk to your partner about, but you're having trouble finding the words. This is a really good way to get your energy optimal before you go and you have that conversation. Okay? So, another thing you can do is bees breath. This is a similar way it's going to activate the center. So, all you do is you place your fingers in your ears and you'll make a humming sound. So, it's going to sound like this. And then when you need to take a breath, you'll take a breath and you do it again. You do this for a minute or 2 minutes. You really want to really try to close off the ears so you are going to hear the sound inside of your head. This is a great breath for anxiety. It's a great breath for people who need to do some public speaking, but it's a great breath for you, especially if you have something that you need to talk to your partner about and you're trying to get your courage up to do it, or just really want to have this center working optimally so that you are say exactly what you need to say so you can get your point across. The other thing too would be working with the colors blue, indigo. That will help balance the center as well. So stones that are blue or indigo, clothing, candles, things like that. All of these things, will help you improve the energy of your throat chakra and by extension help you improve your communication. Now, often what happens, like I mentioned before, remember there's other people involved in this, your partner is involved in this as well. And so what happens though is that if we start to work on our own communication, often the other person really has no choice but to change as well, right? So what they're going to find is if you're communicating much better and perhaps there was some kind of disconnect between you guys, is that when you start to change, they're going to have no choice but to change as well. Their energy kind of has to meet you halfway, I guess is what I'm saying. Um, the other thing I would suggest is just to think about, what could be underlying issues here. Communication is usually a symptom, not a cause of problems. So you may want to explore what else is going on in the relationship more deeply. And I will say, if you're interested in any of this, if you want to talk to me personally about it, get a hold of me and we can set something up for some more individualized help, okay? But that was my best answer without knowing any of the situation at all. All right, next question I have is from Katie. And Katie said that she's been having some weirdly clairvoyant dreams lately, and she wants to know if there's some advice to strengthen that clairvoyant muscle, that particular one. She said mostly what is major and minor events that she's able to kind of see in her friends' lives, and she's just looking for some advice. Okay, so here would be my best advice for Katie and for anybody who's got a similar question. So our clairvoyance is connected to the third eye. And contrary to what a lot of people think, not all of our intuition is connected to the third eye, but this particular one is. So if you missed episode 25, that's all about the third eye. And then the second episode is episode 26, was all about the four clairs. And there's a whole section in there about clairvoyance. So if you've already seen those, then you don't have to go back and watch them. But if you haven't seen them yet, you might find something in them useful. I'm going to try to summarize some of the points. So as far as strengthening clairvoyance, especially because this is the particular clair and the particular part of the intuition that you want strengthened and not just an overall strengthening of the main system, I would recommend candle gazing if you're not already doing it. So candle gazing will stimulate the pineal gland, and through stimulating the pineal gland will stimulate the third eye, and it may help greatly. So what happens for a lot of people is they kind of try candle gazing a little bit, they dabble in it, they kind of think it's good, and then they sort of fall off and they don't do it more. So like most of the stuff that I'm recommending to people, if this isn't something you can just kind of dabble in, you got to do it. So if you want to try the candle gazing, you want to make some kind of a commitment where you're going to do it more days than not, and it doesn't have to be long, it just be a couple of minutes. You set the candle on the table, dim all the lights. I sometimes keep a salt lamp in the background for some ambiance. And then you're going to stare into the center of the flame. You'll let your eyes kind of glaze over. You might let them kind of go soft at the edges. It's okay if they water, they sometimes will. If you need to take a break, you just kind of look away from the candle and then come back. And for somebody who's just beginning the process, I would start with a couple of minutes at a time, and you can work up to, 5 minutes if you want. And then, don't make the mistake that a lot of people make, which I laugh because in my muggle life, I'm a science and math teacher, and I just got done with like my last student who's studying for finals. And all the kids, they always make these sweeping statements about all during winter break, they're going to study every single day for this test, that's coming up. And it's no, you're not. You're not going to study every single day. So don't make sweeping statements like that. So we don't want to say, oh, I'm going to candle gaze every single day, because we're probably not going to do the practice every single day. But if we could say I'm going to do it most days or more days than not, we're more likely to keep up that regular practice. So start with 3 days a week. If that seems good, go to 4 days a week, maybe 5 days a week. But we do want to be trying to do these practices more days than not. And you want to give something like candle gaze, and you want to give this like at least a month before you're going to start to see any results. So a lot of these things, unfortunately, are slow, but they do have big, big outcomes and big changes afterwards if we give them the fair shot that they need. Other things to strengthen, particularly the third eye, and therefore the clairvoyant muscle, would be third eye exercises. So third eye exercises can be, well, let me talk about this one. So there's a breath that you can do. I talk about it in one of those last two episodes that I mentioned to you, probably in episode 25, the one on the third eye. So there's an exercise where you basically start by closing your eyes. You inhale and exhale for a few breaths just to kind of reset yourself. And then what you're going to do is you're going to inhale the breath, and then you'll exhale it. And at the bottom of the breath, you're going to hold your breath as long as you can. And while you do it, you're going to focus on that space where the third eye energetically would be. And you're just going to focus on that space until you need to exhale, and then you're going to exhale. All right? And then you're going to inhale again and immediately exhale. And then again, you're going to hold at the bottom of the breath. So what happens is most of the time when we hold the breath, we hold it at the top. It's a different mechanism. But when we hold in the bottom, we actually start to stimulate the third eye. So if you try that breath for a couple of minutes at a time, and again, this would be like the candle gazing thing. You can't just do it one or two times. You have to kind of commit to it. I'm going to do it several times a week for at least a month, and you'll see that will probably improve your clairvoyant muscle. Now, what I will say is that when you do this, and you do it, you may notice this the first time, or it may take a couple of times to notice it, but you may start to see, when you're focusing on that point between the eyes, you may start to see this kind of flashing light. So some people say it looks white, some people might say it looks violet or purple, this light kind of flashing or swirling or moving, and this is a sign that we actually are stimulating the third eye. So it's a good thing when we start to see that. If you don't see it, it's okay, but if you do see it, it's definitely a sign that you're doing something. The other thing that you can do is you can kind of divorce that from the breath, and you can just sit in meditation, and then you can just focus on that spot. Now here though, what I suggest you do is when we close our eyes and we just kind of focus ahead, we're just going to be focusing like out, right? Directly out from the eyes. But if you notice, the third eye is actually above our own eyes. So when you close your eyes, what you want to do is you want to try to look up and to the center. And one thing that has helped me is if you remember those magic eye posters and pictures that they would sell in the mall around Christmas. I remember I bought my dad one that was a golfer. For those who've never seen them, you can Google it, magic eye puzzles. And you would stare at these things and they would look like patterns of something, but when you stared at them right, you would see this picture come out at you. And that mechanism that needed in order to get that picture to come out is a same mechanism that will stimulate the third eye. So it's really like, again, it's kind of like looking to the center and looking up, and you kind of strain the eye muscles in order to do that. and you can just sit in meditation and try to hold that as long as you can. It's like way easier said than done. So at first, you may only really be able to hold it for like a few seconds, 10 to 15 seconds. But over time, you're going to train that muscle to be able to hold it longer, and you may start to see that flashing too. So if you start to see that flashing, it means that you're stimulating the third eye for sure. Other things you can do are yogic eye exercises. So this is actually using the physical eyes to stimulate the third eye. So kind of looking up and down. You can look to the left and to the right. I go through and I talk about those exercises in that episode 25. I go through and talk about those as well. So important thing to remember though is that for most people, intuition of any kind doesn't often come on demand. Like some people get lucky and they're really able to control it. And for most of us, even as we strengthen it and we get good at it, we're never truly able to like call it on demand. So it is important to remember that is that even though you may strengthen it, I guess the question I have for you is what is your reason for wanting to strengthen it? So are you wanting to have more experiences like the ones you're having? Are you wanting more control of it? Are you wanting to like be able to like predict things in order to help people? So kind of thinking about what your reason for wanting to strengthen this clairvoyant muscle is can kind of help you see what you should do. So all those exercises I'm saying, they're just going to strengthen it in general. But as far as controlling it, that can be a little bit more difficult. And a lot of people who have studied for a long time, they still find that it just comes when it comes. I will tell you that you're more likely to have it come when you're really relaxed. So if you're really tensed up, probably less likely to have it. So if you want more of those experiences, try to really relax before bedtime. And since you said yours are coming to you through dreams, you can program your dreams too. That's another possibility. So, programming your dreams is where you suggest something before you go into the dream state. So, you suggest that I would like to have a clairvoyant experience during the dream and then see what happens. But again, it can take some time to be able to control it, and some people really are never able to call it on demand, unfortunately. All right, so I hope that answered the question. If anybody's got any more questions after that, you let me know. Otherwise, I am going to sign off now, and I really hope that everyone has a great winter solstice, a great Yule. You have an awesome dark moon tomorrow, so if you want to do some good releasing, now is the time for it. Okay, and then new moon on Friday. So a lot going on. There's so much great energy right now. So I hope you can take advantage of that. And I hope that some of this in this episode tonight has helped. All right, until next time, blessed be.